Hi, welcome back to Father-Offspring Interviews, episode 15. Shall we get to it?
Sure.
All right. We're going to start off with two questions related to depression. So the first is kind of a big picture take on it, while the second is a more reductive question. So first, Marianne from Norway says, can you please talk about anxiety/depression in non-human species? Is it triggered in the same way as in humans, or is it completely different? And the second question is, what are your thoughts about the J&J Orexin 2 antagonist that seems to help in depression?
Okay, so the big picture one, do other primates have depression, anxiety? Absolutely. Does it look like it in us? Yes and no. But the first point is you get a bunch of types of researchers together and they talk about depressive-like behavior in another species. They'll talk about an animal model of depression. Most primatologists studying real primates out in the wild don't talk about depression models or anxiety models. They talk about depression and anxiety. Okay, in a very narrow way, what would anxiety and depression look like in a baboon? You're some low-ranking baboon and you're off by yourself, there's nobody around, and you just scored, you found a rabbit there, and you grab the rabbit and kill it because you're about to eat it. And at this point, anybody else in the troop, if they knew you had a rabbit, can come over and boot you off and take it over because you're low ranking. So nobody's around, but as a measure of this guy's anxiety, he gets ready to eat. How many seconds go by before he's got to look over his shoulders to see if anyone's coming? How many seconds? That is a measure of anxiety. What would depression look like under that circumstance? The guy is sitting there, and at some point, he just puts the rabbit down and walks away without anybody there. It's hopeless. I'm helpless. Some going to steal it from me. What does it look like in sort of a more real-world primate version? Primate anxiety, a wonderful study where these were captive baboons, but they had ambulatory cardiac things to measure heart rate. So you got a low-ranking guy, and he's sitting there, and he looks half asleep, and he's doing absolutely nothing, and along comes the highest-ranking male in the troop, and this guy doesn't do anything. He's exactly, and you see his heart rate goes through the roof like crazy until the guy passes him, and then it goes back to normal. So that's anxiety. What would non-human primate depression look like? The most common version is you're female and you lose your infant. And what is often seen is that females will carry around their dead infant for days afterward. The word that creeps into the literature is carrying the baby around until it is mummified. And what you see in some circumstances then is a mother who will sit down and stop foraging and stop interacting socially and becoming withdrawn, and you are seeing a non-human version of a depression. And in fact, some of my baboon work over the years showed that if you were a low-ranking baboon, you have a chronically activated stress response for the same reason that you see in a human with depression. What's happening at the brain versus pituitary versus adrenals. So it's the same nuts and bolts, all of that. Where is the difference? You can sit and be feeling anxious about what the hell is going to happen in November in our country, and no baboon would do that. Or you could feel depressed about climate change or these big abstract. So we take the same basic blueprint, the same grieving, the same sense of dis-ease, and we could just extend it into all sorts of unprecedented directions. Okay, the J&J, Johnson & Johnson, Orexin 2 antagonist for depression. Okay, so there's lots of different subparts to depression: anhedonia, you lose pleasure, anticipation, psychomotor retardation, it's exhausting to do anything, rumination, you can't stop thinking sad things, and different neurotransmitters have been associated with each of them: serotonin, shortage of it with the rumination, shortage of dopamine, probably with the anhedonia, shortage of norepinephrine, probably with the psychomotor retardation. And then there's another component to depression, which is your sleep gets all screwed up, usually in the form of some trouble falling asleep. Far more typically, you wake up hours earlier than your body really needs to, and you are not rested, you are exhausted. Early morning awakening, and that is there day after day, even though you are falling on your face. And in addition, you see the architecture, the structure of sleep. There's different sort of stages to sleep, REM sleep and slow wave sleep, and there's a whole structure to it which goes down the tubes during depression. Two interesting things about that. First one is, oh my God, you're asleep and your brain sleep cycles are working differently. You are not looking at just like self-indulgence, you're looking at a biological disorder. Other point being, when you were sleep deprived, your mood is more prone towards being in a depressive direction. As you get more depressed, it disrupts your sleep more, an official vicious cycle, and eventually the lack of sleep probably plays a role in some of the memory problems, the cognitive problems in depression. So along comes orexin, also known as hypocretin. It's a neurotransmitter. It's found in the hypothalamus, and it's got something to do with preventing sleep onset. What does it do? You boost up orexin levels and a sense of projection into the amygdala, which is about arousal and fear and anxiety. It sends a projection into a part of the brain called the locus ceruleus, which is also about arousal, alerting. And what does it do? It activates both of those, and thus when orexin is signaling, it's not a very easy time to fall asleep. And what you see is stress and stress hormones will boost up orexin expression in the hypothalamus, lateral hypothalamus for people who care, projecting out to the amygdala, locus ceruleus. So that raises the totally clear, obvious two questions. Number one, so do you see evidence of orexin being overactive in depression? And would that have something to do with the trouble with sleep onset? And the official answer, looking at the literature, is there's just, I don't know, kind of some hints in that direction. One study says yes, one study says no. Can't they just get somebody who's depressed and put a tube down into their hypothalamus and look at the levels? No, you can't do that. So you're looking at something very indirect, like the levels of the stuff in your cerebral spinal fluid. And it's not clear. It's ambiguous at this point, which takes us then to like the ultimate question. So if you come up with a drug that can block orexin's actions, block orexin receptors, there's two types of receptors, there's two types of orexin, details don't matter, but if you block it, do you now more easily go into sleep, and does this help your depressive state? And what seems pretty clear at this point with a very new literature, with only a handful of studies, is blocking orexin action seem to be good for inducing sleep, good for sleep problems. To the extent that they're doing anything helpful for depression, it seems to merely be secondary to getting better sleep. The field, I'm being snarky here, but seems to be kind of gummed up in that stage of saying, whoa, this is going to be amazing because it should have something to do with depression. Whoa, this is going to be amazing once we get around to studying it. And the little hints that have come in so far, if there are effects that are direct on depression rather than indirect through better sleep, they look pretty mild and not easily replicated. So I think that's a stay tuned for that one. That might pan out to be something great, may not.
Okay, our next question from Matt from Redwood City is there a neurological basis for gut knowing? As in, I can't explain how, but I just knew in my gut the right answer.
Yeah, big surprise is not really in your gut, although your gut is sending messages to the part of your brain that's really about this. This is your limbic system. Limbic system is about emotion, all of that. Emotion totally separate from your cortex, your cognitive, analytical stuff turns out to be nonsense. Weeks ago, I was singing the praises of this neuroanatomist, Vali Nauda, who I worshiped. And among other things, he was the person who showed the limbic system actually sends a big old projection into your frontal cortex by way of something called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. Oh my God, emotion going into your cognitive part of the brain. That's so embarrassing. That's so undignified. What could that be about? That's where your gut feelings are coming from. That's where, to sort of use framing the way that this neurologist, incredibly influential one, Antonio Damasio, says that, yeah, we're all familiar with the notion of running a thought experiment. And your cortex is sitting there saying, well, what if I do this? That may be the outcome, but what if I do that? And that could be the outcome. And what's the probability? All of that. What that projection from the limbic system into your frontal cortex is for is to do a feel experiment. How's it going to feel if I do this and this is the outcome? How's it going to feel for that person if I do this and this winds up happening to them? That's where it's coming from. What does it look like when you get damage to this portal from the limbic system into the prefrontal cortex? You get subtle stuff. Just as you're about to be Mr. Spock and say, oh, it's wonderful, you don't have emotion marinating your frontal cortex, you're going to make such logical decisions. You get people who are screwed up in two ways. The first one is they make appallingly utilitarian decisions about things, heartless, remorseless, where you are shocked at the things they say, I would do in this circumstance, where nobody else would ever do that. The other thing is exactly the question that's brought up here. You don't get gut feelings. And as a result, people with damage there have a lot of trouble making decisions, because they're just not getting that gut intuitive sense. So that's absolutely what you're getting. That's your limbic system doing all sorts of emotional murbling to itself and eventually sending an opinion up to the prefrontal cortex, which is where you get your gut instinct from. Okay, so that's great because look, you damage that and you get people making appalling decisions, all of that. This is great. Nonetheless, there is a downside, which is also exactly what you alluded to, which is those people, when they do that, it's not right. In fact, it's immoral. It's disgusting. I can't tell you why. That's the sure sign that that gut limbic system is just driving your cortex into an outgroup attitude. And if somebody has only gotten that far, they say, I can't tell you why, but it's wrong when they do that. It's only gotten to that point. When 2 minutes or 2 weeks later, they come back to you and say, I thought, here's why it's wrong when they do that. All you're seeing is the prefrontal cortex has had time to come up with a rationalization for the gut feeling. So gut feelings can be great and they can be wonderful, and our life is made more emotively multicolored as a result of that. It's a really lousy litmus test for deciding what is right and wrong out there.
All right, our final question of the episode is People Magazine. What's up with that?
Well, I don't know who the questioner is, but now and then I've made allusions to being an avid follower of People magazine, and it's for the science. The science, all because of they had an issue back in 2001, which was one of the most wonderful issues of a science journal I ever saw. It was their end of the year 50 most beautiful people on Earth issue, and rather than just tawdry, shallow photos, they asked each one of these people, each one of these select, what's the roots of your beauty? Is it nature or is it nurture? And they had people go on about this at that point, and it was the most wonderful thing on earth to read about. No surprise, there were some pretty extreme ideologues among the 50 beauteous. Like, for example, there were people taking a radical environmentalist view. Any environmental manipulation, you could turn anyone, into anything. Ben Affleck, for example, was going on about how all of his success was due to his having his teeth capped recently. There was an actress I had never heard of before and haven't heard of since, Jenna Elfman, whose environmentally induced beauty was apparently from the fact that she followed a diet that varied depending on what your blood type was, which was news to me. And of course, you had some people who were radical geneticists saying all of that. Josh Brolin, who I am guessing has a handsome father, because he said, what's the basis of I got my dad's genes. You can't ask for a much more in your face at the barricades sort of statement about genetic determinism. Then there was this newscaster, another one that I had never heard of before and haven't heard of since, Meredith Vieira, who had this radical extremist genetic program for explaining things. She recounted like these heartbreaking cases where someone did a bad makeup job on her before she went on screen, or where she did something impetuous and like did a bad peroxide job on her hair, and disaster, and it looked terrible and terrible, but yet somehow she came out looking wonderful at the other end. How did you do it? Quote, because of my phenomenal genes. So you had this extremely polarized world of radical environmentalists and radical genetic determinists. And was there anyone who had like a more modern sort of view on how the two interact? Finally, there was one of them, once again, someone I had never heard of before and hadn't heard from since, a singer named Monica, who apparently is so famous that either she never had a last name or she gave it away or didn't need it anymore. But when she was asked, what's the basis of your beauty? She came up with classic environmentalist agitprop. She said, oh, I happen to be very good at putting on makeup. Okay, we seem to be back in that camp, but no, there was a wrinkle to this. They then asked her mother, why is she so good at putting on makeup? And she said, what can I say? It's just in her genes. It's inborn. Whoa, a genetic propensity interacting with an environment in which makeup has been invented, and you can't say if it is nature or nurture. Damn, if only people were this sophisticated about where things like intelligence or criminology or substance abuse is coming from. So I thought that was just like one of the best issues ever, and I wrote up something in Discover magazine about it. So that's where my fascination from it came from.
And that is all for episode 15. Keep submitting questions at the form found in the Instagram story highlight and bio or the YouTube video description. I'm Offspring Sapolsky, and thanks for your continued support of Science and the Beard.